Hi everyone, thanks for joining me here on JKD Handmade. For this tutorial, I'll be showing you how to work up this crochet extreme drop stitch / lemon peel cardigan. This cardigan is constructed from the bottom going upwards. That means we will be working from the bottom, which is the length of the cardigan, working our way to the underarm, and then it's from the underarm to the shoulder. So from the bottom, the length of the cardigan to the underarm, we will be working the back panel plus the front panels all joined, and thereafter from the underarm going up to the shoulder, we will be working the back panel and front panels separately. The sleeves are worked separately and sewn onto the cardigan. I will be working a size medium for this tutorial. For the materials, you will need yarn, and I used 3 colors here. The thing is, when choosing your colors, make certain that they are all of the same weight. That's really important. So I went ahead and used a double knit, which is a light worsted or a category 3. And now this is 100% acrylic, and each skein is 100 grams. The recommended hook is a 4mm hook. To give you an estimate on the yarn quantities, for this size medium that I worked up of the length that I've got it at, I used around 430 grams in total. Okay, so these 3 colors are all of the same weight. That's double knit, and that's really important. So you will also need hooks, 2 of them. I'm going with a 4mm hook, which is the recommended hook on the yarn label for all the ribbings. And then I went ahead and used a hook that's 2 sizes larger than the recommended hook. So this is a 6mm hook for the rest of this cardigan. You will also need a measuring tape, a pair of scissors, stitch markers, and a yarn or a wool needle. Okay, so when it comes to the stitch pattern, especially this extreme drop stitch, the only way to really work the stitch pattern is working bottom up. So we will be working from the length, the actual length of the cardigan, going up towards the underarm and then towards the shoulder and neckline. Now, for this extreme drop stitch, the reason I choose a double knit is because it just makes it so much easier when gathering up the loops to create the stitch onto the hook. I find that with a thicker weight like a category 4 or a category 5, it becomes really difficult to gather those loops onto the hook. So that's just a heads up that I think in my opinion, I think that working with the double knit makes it a lot easier to work the stitch pattern. So that does it for the intro. Let's get on with this tutorial. We will begin with a foundation double crochet. So it's form a slip knot using the larger of the 2 hooks, chain 4, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now into the first chain right there, yarn over and insert your hook into that chain, pull up a loop. You've got 3 loops on your hook. Yarn over and go through only 1 loop on your hook. That way you've created a little chain right here, and that becomes the start of our next stitch. Then yarn over, go through 2 loops on your hook. You have 2 loops remaining. Yarn over, go through those 2 loops on your hook. You've now created your stitch right there. Now, just so that you know, here's that stitch that we had just worked, but those 4 chains, those 4 initial chains that we had chained when starting off, 3 of those chains are counted as our first stitch. So we have in fact worked our second stitch. Then it's yarn over, insert your hook into that little chain that we had worked earlier on, going through both the loops from that chain. Pull up a loop, you have 3 loops on your hook. Yarn over, go through only 1 loop on your hook. That way you've created a little chain, and that becomes the start of our next stitch. Yarn over, go through 2 loops on your hook. Yarn over, go through 2 loops on your hook. And here you have created your next stitch. So you'll continue on, then it's yarn over, and insert your hook into that little chain that we had formed earlier on. Yarn over, go through only 1 loop on your hook. That way you've created the next chain, the start of our next stitch. Yarn over, go through 2 loops on your hook. Yarn over, go through 2 loops on your hook. And this way we continue to create stitches. So you'll continue on working this foundation double crochet until you've worked a length of stitches like I've done here. Here are the shoulder to shoulder measurements for the different sizes. Use the measurement for the size that you are working on. You may pause the video to jot down the measurement. Once you've worked a length of stitches, as I have done here, we now need to measure this length of stitches. The measurement that we're using is the shoulder to shoulder measurement. When measuring, do not stretch on the length of stitches. I'm working on a size medium, and the shoulder to shoulder measurement for a medium is 16 inches or around 41 centimeters. So I need to work double that length. So it's going to be 32 inches or just about 81 centimeters. So you are measuring the shoulder to shoulder measurement times 2, because we are working this cardigan, we're working it bottom up, and as well as we're working all 3 panels in one. So we're working the front together with the back, and then it's the front again. I guess this will make more sense as we get further into the tutorial. Now that you've adjusted your foundation row to measure twice the shoulder to shoulder measurement, you can go ahead and count the number of stitches. In order to work the stitch pattern, we need to have a stitch count that's in multiples of 11 plus 2. I've counted my stitches and I have 109 stitches. So in order to get it to a multiple of 11, I need to work 1 more stitch. That would bring it to 110 stitches. And then I need to work 2 more stitches because the stitch count should be in multiples of 11 plus 2. So that means for my stitch count, it's 110 plus 2, and that would be 112 stitches. So you will go ahead and adjust your stitch count to the closest multiple of 11 plus 2 stitches. When adjusting your stitch count, I always choose to adjust it to the closest multiple of 11. So in order to avoid stretching out my cardigan too much or maybe even tightening up on my cardigan, which I'm not really worried about because I do know that once I work 2 or 3 more rows, these rows of stitches do stretch out, as I will show you later on in the tutorial. So when adjusting your stitch count, I'd say that if you need to increase by 4 or 5 stitches to get it to a multiple of 11 plus 2, then go ahead and do so. But if you need to adjust it by more than 6 stitches, I think that it would be better to remove stitches to adjust your stitch count rather than adding on stitches. That way I feel that you avoid loosening up on your cardigan even more. But obviously if you do want it an oversized cardigan, go ahead and add on your stitches. That would just loosen up on your cardigan even further. But as I said, when you work your next 2 rows, you will find that this length of stitches does stretch out even more. But I'll show you as we get into the tutorial as well. Okay, so now let's work row 2 of this cardigan, and for row 2, row 3 and row 4 we'll be working the setup for the extreme drop stitch. So in order to work the extreme drop stitch pattern, we do need to set up our stitches, and by those stitches I mean it's chain 1 spaces that we'll be working our extreme drop stitch into. Row 2, chain 2, chain 2 counts as a double crochet and turn. Work double crochets into the next 5 stitches. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Together with your chain 2, you have 6 stitches. Then chain 1 and skip the next stitch, and into the next 10 stitches work double crochets. I've worked 10 double crochets. So the stitch pattern for the rest of this row is chain 1, skip 1, 10 double crochets in the next 10 stitches. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. That's your stitch pattern for the rest of this row. It's chain 1, skip 1, 10 double crochets. I've continued on with my stitch pattern to the end of this row. Here I am at the end. I've worked 10 double crochets, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 stitches remaining. So to complete this row, we need to chain 1, skip the next stitch, and work double crochets into the remaining 6 stitches. Now when you get to your last stitch, keep in mind that that last stitch is that initial chain 4 that we had started off our foundation double crochet with. So 3 of those 4 stitches are counted as 1 stitch, as you see here. I've worked my last stitch into that chain. Then it's chain 2. Chain 2 counts as a double crochet and turn. Here we're working row 3. Work double crochets into the next 3 stitches. So that's 1, 2, 3. Together with the chain 2, we have 4 stitches. Then it's chain 1, skip the next stitch, and work 3 double crochets. worked into the double crochet, chain 1 space, and the double crochet. So here's my first double crochet. The second double crochet is worked into the chain 1 space, and then the third double crochet into the next stitch. So the stitch pattern for row 3 is chain 1, skip the next stitch, double crochets into the next 6 stitches. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Here's my 6 stitches, and then it's chain 1, skip the next stitch, and then it's 3 double crochets. The first double crochet into that stitch, the second double crochet into the chain 1 space, and the third double crochet into the stitch. Continue on with this stitch pattern. It's chain 1, skip 1, 6 double crochets, and then it's chain 1, skip 1, 3 double crochets. Continue on to the end of this row. I've worked my way to the end of this row. Here I am. I've chained 1, skipped 1, and I've ended off with 4 double crochets. Row 4, chain 2 and turn. Double crochet in the next stitch. Chain 1, skip the next stitch, and work 7 double crochets into those stitches and chain 1 spaces. Here's those 7 double crochets. Then continuing on, it's chain 1, skip 1 stitch, and you'll work 2 double crochets into the next 2 stitches. So that's 1 and 2. Then chain 1, skip the next stitch, 7 double crochets into the next 7 stitches and chain 1 spaces. Then you'll continue on with the stitch pattern, which is chain 1, skip 1, 2 double crochets, then chain 1, skip 1, 7 double crochets. Continue on with this stitch pattern to the end of this row. I've continued on with row 4. At the end, you will finish off with a chain 1, skip 1, and 2 double crochets. Now that I've set up my stitches for the extreme drop stitch, at this point I also need to go back and bring in my change of color on my yarn. But before I do so, I do want to quickly show you that this length of stitches that we've worked, these rows 1, 2, 3, and now 4. Notice that it has stretched out quite a bit. I had worked my first foundation row, which was 32 inches, and now I've got it up to just over, actually close to 36 inches. So yes, as I explained earlier on, your work does stretch out, so be mindful of that as well. And keep that foundation row just at your shoulder to shoulder measurement times 2. So now we've set up our stitches for the extreme drop stitch, which we will be working in the next row. And the way the stitches worked, it's from row 5. We'll work our stitches into these chain 1 spaces that you see here. That's from row 2, 3, and 4. Now, before we do so, we do need to bring in our change of color. I'm going to undo my last stitch, and I'll rework that double crochet, leaving it unfinished. So it's yarn over, insert your hook into that last stitch, pull up a loop, then it's yarn over and go through 2 loops on your hook, and you leave it right there. You can bring in your change of color, form a little loop, and pull that loop through Continuing on with the change of color, chain 2 and turn. You will need to cut off on the previous color. Okay, so let's just take a moment for me to explain the stitch pattern. Now here, these chain 1 spaces that we've worked in the previous rows, this is where we'll work the extreme drop stitch pattern into. You will use these 5 chain 1 spaces to work 1 extreme drop stitch pattern. So it's for every stitch pattern you use 5 chain 1 spaces. And also there's a certain number of loops that you will work into each chain space. So for the first chain space, it's 2 loops. For the second chain space, you will work 2 loops into that space. For the third chain space, you will work 3 loops. And then for the fourth chain space, it's 2 loops. And for the fifth chain space, it's 2 loops. And that will give us 1 extreme drop stitch. Okay, so here I must admit I did lose the correct video here. But please follow the instructions on the screen, or you can listen to the instructions instead of following what I do. So into the next stitch, work 2 double crochets. That means including your chain 2 and those 2 double crochets, you would have 3 double crochets to start off with. So I did change my stitches here, it's just that I didn't press record. So continuing on, it's chain 3. Now we're working the extreme drop stitch. So we will be working the stitch pattern into these 5 chain spaces. Okay, so let's go. It's yarn over, insert your hook into that first chain space, pull up a loop and elongate it. Pull up the next loop, so it's 2 loops that we've pulled up in the first chain 1 space. Into the second chain 1 space, we'll pull up 2 loops as well. So here's the first loop, and now for the second. And then into the third chain 1 space, we'll pull up 3 loops. So it's yarn over, insert your hook into that space, pull up the first loop, elongate the loop. Here's the second loop. Always elongate your loop. And here's the third loop. Now for the fourth chain 1 space, here we'll pick up 2 loops. Here's the first loop. And then it's the second loop. And lastly, into the fifth chain 1 space, we'll pick up 2 loops. Here's the first loop. And here's the second loop. To complete the stitch, yarn over and pull through all those loops on your hook, leaving behind the last loop. So that means you must have 2 loops remaining on your hook, as I have here. Now that last loop that you've left behind on your hook, that last loop comes from your chain 3. Then yarn over and pull through those 2 loops on your hook to complete the stitch. Then chain 3, and then we're working 2 double crochets into the next double crochet and 2 double crochets into the next double crochet. So in between our extreme drop stitch pattern, we will have 4 double crochets. So that's 2 double crochets into the first stitch and 2 double crochets into the next stitch. Then chain 3, 1, 2, and 3, and here we're working our extreme drop stitch into these 5 chain 1 spaces. To work the extreme drop stitch, you're pulling up 2 loops from the first chain space, pulling up 2 loops from the second chain space. Remember to elongate those loops. Pull up 3 loops from the third chain space. pull up 2 loops from the 4th chain space, and you're pulling up 2 loops from the 5th chain space. Then yarn over and pull through all those loops on your hook, except for the last loop. Notice that the last loop is the loop that's attached to the chain 3. Then yarn over and pull through those 2 loops, and then it's a chain 3, and then you'll continue on with your 2 double crochets into that next stitch, and then it's 2 double crochets into the next stitch. So that's your stitch pattern. It's chain 3, the extreme drop stitch into the next 5 chain 1 spaces, and then it's a chain 3, and then 2 double crochets into the next stitch, 2 double crochets into the next stitch. So you continue on with this stitch pattern to the end of the row, which I am right here. I've worked my last extreme drop stitch, and here's a chain 3, and then into the second last stitch I'll work 2 double crochets. That was 1 and my second one, and then into my last stitch I'll work 1 double crochet. So I've ended off with 3 double crochets, and that would be exactly how I would have started off this row, with 3 double crochets. So for this row it's double crochets, then it's chain 3, extreme drop stitch, chain 3, double crochets. Now continuing on with the next row, it's chain 2, turn, chain 2 counts as a double crochet, and here we're working double crochets into all stitches. So it's 1 double crochet per stitch. Here's a double crochet into the next stitch, and a double crochet into the next stitch. And then for our chain 3s, we will work 3 double crochets into those chain 3s. Here's 1, 2, and 3. And then into the stitch above the extreme drop stitch right here, you'll work a double crochet. And that's your stitch pattern for this row. It's 3 double crochets into your chain 3s, and then it's 1 double crochet per stitch. So that's 1, 2, 3, and 4 double crochets here. 3 double crochets into the chain space, 1 double crochet into the stitch above the extreme drop stitch. So you'll continue on to the end of the row. I've worked my way to the end of row 6. Now at this point, you do need to make certain that your stitch count is the same as the stitch count that you had started off with. So that means your stitch count for row 6 must be the same as that of row 1. In my case, it was 112 stitches. That means for row 6, I must have 112 stitches. Make certain that your stitch count is the same. We will now begin working the lemon peel stitch pattern. So there are rules with regard to the stitch pattern, but we'll get into them as we get on with this tutorial. So it's chain 2. Chain 2 counts as a double crochet and turn. Single crochet into the next stitch. Double crochet into the next stitch. So for the stitch pattern, we're alternating between single crochet and double crochet. It's a single crochet into the next stitch, double crochet into the next stitch, and so on to the end of this row. I've worked my way to the end of the row, and here I've worked a double crochet into the second last stitch. I'll work a single crochet into the last stitch. So remember that the chain 2 from the previous round counts as a stitch. So don't forget to work your last stitch into that second chain from chain 2. And now here for the lemon peel stitch pattern, the rule is that you need to alternate your stitches in every row as well. So I've ended with a single crochet. I must begin with a double crochet. So that means in my case, I'm starting off with a chain 2, which counts as a double crochet. And then turn. Into the next stitch, work a single crochet, followed by a double crochet into the next stitch. So now just a little tip here. Notice your stitches, look at them and notice them. You'll notice that these single crochets from the previous round have really bigger gaps than the double crochets. So here I'm working a single crochet into the double crochet from the previous round. And then here, if you look at the stitch right here, it's a single crochet from the previous round. So that stitch, look at the gap or that little space. It's much bigger than that of the double crochets. The single crochet, the gaps from the single crochets are a lot bigger. Here's a double crochet and you can barely see the gap from the double crochets. So notice your stitches, and that way you'll know that you need to work a double crochet into that single crochet from the previous round, and it's a single crochet into the double crochet from the previous round. So that's the lemon peel stitch pattern. You alternating stitches, so it's single crochet, double crochet, single crochet, double crochet, and then when you get to the next round, you're working single crochets into double crochets from the previous round and double crochets into single crochets from the previous round. Now I've continued on to the end of this round. Okay, so not really the end, I've got my last stitch. Always remember to work a stitch into that last chain 2 from the previous round. So into that stitch, I'll work a single crochet. And then for my next round, it's chain 2 because remember I had ended off the previous round with a single crochet. Turn a single crochet into the next stitch, followed by a double crochet, single crochet, double crochet, and so on. You're always alternating your stitches. I've continued on, so all I've done here was repeat row 8 of the lemon peel stitch pattern. I've adhered to the rules of the stitch pattern. At this point, I've worked from the bottom, which is the length of my cardigan, going up to the underarm of my cardigan. So here's the bottom that I've worked, and then that's all the way, and I've stopped at the underarm. This is the length of the cardigan. To adjust the length of the cardigan, if you want your cardigan longer, you will work more rows of the lemon peel stitch pattern in between. So that what I've worked in blue, you would work more rows. Okay, so I've ended off at the underarm, which is what I've worked in orange, and all I've done was repeat the same stitch pattern from row 2 to row 7. Now if I take measurements, measuring the upper part of this panel from my row 2 to row 7, repeat, that measures around 3 inches or around 8 centimeters. And then if I measure all the way to the bottom, that measures just over 12 inches. So that's the length of my cardigan from the underarm going downwards. So that's just over 12 inches or around 33 centimeters. Now that we've worked the length of this cardigan from the bottom to the underarm, we'll now work the upper portion of this cardigan from the underarm to the shoulder or neckline. At the same time, we will separate the body of this cardigan into the back panel and the two front panels on either side. Before moving on, you do need to make certain that you've got the length correct, which is from the whatever your chosen length is, from the bottom going up to the underarm. And then before ending, you would have to work the rows 2 to row 7 as I've done here, and at the same time you'll need to change your yarn colors as well. I've already shown you at the beginning of this tutorial how to work those rows and how to change your yarn color, which will be exactly the same as I've shown you. Okay, so continuing on with the second portion or upper portion of the body of this cardigan, here we will be separating this the body into the back section, and then we've got the front sections on either side. So at this point, we need to find the center of this. So it's the center back of this panel, and we'll use the number of stitches that we have to find the exact center. So in my case, I used 112 stitches, and half of that would be 56 stitches. So I know that my 56th stitch would be the center of this cardigan. So here I am finding that 56th stitch. Now you must realize, if you've got an even number of stitches, you will have 2 stitches that mark off your center back. So I'm going to count 56 stitches on one side and then 56 stitches from the opposite side, and I'll have my center 2 stitches marking off the center back. If you've got an odd number of stitches, you will have only 1 stitch marking off your center back. And yes, I do know that I went about this the long way, because I could have just marked off the 56th and 57th stitch. But I just needed to make sure that this point was clearly understood. So if you have an even stitch count, it would be 2 stitches that mark off the center back, and if you have an odd stitch count, it would be 1 stitch that marks off the center back. Now you would mark off your center back depending on your stitch count. So you would find half of your stitch count and mark that off as your center back. Now that we have the center back, let's go ahead and mark off the neckline. On the one side of center back, count 3 stitches and mark off the 3rd stitch as I am doing here, and on the opposite side do the same. For an odd stitch count, you would mark off the 4th stitch on either side. Remove the center stitch markers, and in between you should have 6 stitches, or for an odd stitch count you would have 7 stitches marking off the neckline. Now bring the sides of the body panels inwards towards the stitch markers as I am doing here. Make certain that the edges of the panel lines up with the stitch markers. So here we have the back of the cardigan, and these are the front of our cardigan. We will now split the cardigan into the back and the 2 front panels. So we will be working these separately but attached to this panel. So the first thing you need to do is mark off this edge right here. And in order to do so, you need to count the number of stitches and mark off the edge as I am doing here. So it's the exact folded edge of this panel on the one side. The reason we count our stitches is so that we can have an equal number of stitches on either side for both these front panels. So you'll count the number of stitches As in my case, I had 28 stitches on the one side, so I counted off 28 stitches on the next side and I marked that off as well. Now I've got the back panel and the front panels marked off. Let's continue on from where we've stopped with the front panel on one side. We will be working from the edge that we stopped at to the stitch marker, back and forth until we've worked a length that measures the armhole depth measurement for the size that we are working. We are continuing on with the lemon peel stitch pattern. Now I know that I've ended off with a single crochet into that last stitch, so I'll begin with a double crochet, which is a chain 2. Turn, and then I'll work my lemon peel stitch pattern, alternating single crochet and double crochet until I get to that stitch marker. When I get to the stitch marker, work my last stitch into that stitch marked off, and then I'll continue on with my next row. So I'm working back and forth from the start to stitch marker, from stitch marker back to start, and so on. Here are the armhole depth measurements for the different sizes. Use the measurement for the size that you are working on. I've continued on with this front panel, and all I've done was repeat the lemon peel stitch pattern. Notice here that I did work my last stitch right into that stitch marked off with my stitch marker. So all you're doing here is working from the start to the stitch marker back and forth. The length of this portion must measure the armhole depth measurement for the size that you are working on. I'm working on a size medium, and the armhole depth measurement for a size medium is 7.5 inches or 19 centimeters. Notice that when measuring, I'm measuring from the top edge up until that stitch marker. I then fastened off and cut off on the excess yarn, leaving behind a long enough tail to help with the seaming along the shoulders. Okay, so now that that's done, let's get to work on the next portion, which is the back. So we're working from that stitch marker to the next stitch marker on the opposite side. You can remove those stitch markers marking off the neckline as we no longer need them. So when you're working this back portion, you're going to work it in exactly the same way as you did for that front portion that we had just finished off with. Make certain that you are working in the same direction that you had worked the first front portion in. Attach yarn to the stitch that's next to the one that's marked off with your stitch marker. Now here you do need to check on your stitch pattern. So you look at your stitches and pick up on what you're working into, whether it's a double crochet or a single crochet. In my case, I've attached yarn into a single crochet. That's the reason I'm working a chain 2, which counts as a double crochet. My next stitch is a double crochet, so I'll work a single crochet. And then the next stitch is a single crochet, I'll work a double crochet, and so on. At all times, I'm following the rules of working this lemon peel stitch pattern. Work your way to the stitch that's before the one that's marked off with a stitch marker on the opposite side. So all you're doing here is working from stitch to stitch back and forth, just as you had done for your front portion. So in this clip, I've worked all 3 portions. It's the front, back, and the front. And I've worked them in exactly the same way. So once you're done with the back portion, you will fasten off and then reattach yarn into the stitch marked off with your stitch marker, and you work from that stitch marker to the end of the panel, back and forth to complete your second front panel, as I have done here. Now that the body panel is complete, we'll work on the sleeves. Using the 4mm hook, we'll work a ribbing. Form a slip knot, chain 11. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Now when it comes to this chain, you may chain a longer length of chains, and that would give you a wider ribbing, or a shorter length of chains, and that would give you a narrow ribbing. Row 1 into the second chain from the hook, single crochet. Continue with single crochets into the remaining chains. You must have 10 stitches. Always make certain that your stitch count remains the same. Row 2, chain 1 and turn. Here we're working single crochets. We'll work all these single crochets into the back loops only. Continue on with single crochets into the back loops only. Row 3, chain 1 and turn, and here again you're working single crochets into the back loops only. So all you're doing for the ribbing is repeating row 2 until you've worked a length of ribbing like I have done here. This length of ribbing must fit around the wrist. Both edges of the ribbing must meet. Your hand must slip through this ribbing with ease. Once you've got the measurement of your ribbing correct, we can go ahead and join both ends of the ribbing. Bring both edges together, and then it's a chain 1. Insert your hook into the stitch on one side of the ribbing. Insert your hook into the stitch on the opposite side. Yarn over and pull through all 3 loops on your hook. Insert your hook into the stitch on one side, insert your hook into the stitch on the opposite side, and pull through all those loops on your hook. Continue on to join each stitch as you go along. Here I've joined my ribbing edges. At this point, I'll swap out my hook for the larger one. We're now working round one of the sleeve. It's chain 1 and turn. So the side that has the bump on the ribbing is your wrong side, and this would be the right side. Into that same gap as from where chain 1 comes out of, single crochet. Now here you're working single crochets along the top edge of the ribbing. You'll work 1 single crochet per ribbing row. Now if we look at it here, these are the raised edges and they sort of protrude out the ribbing, and then you have the sunken areas in between those raised edges. Now if you count in between those raised areas, there are 2 rows of ribbing. So here's the ridges right here, and then there's 2 rows, and into those rows right along the top edge you'll find little gaps. We'll be working all our stitches into those little gaps along the top edge, and it's 1 stitch per ribbing row. So you'll work single crochets into those little gaps along this top edge. I've worked those single crochets along the top edge. To complete this round, slip stitch into the first single crochet to join. Before continuing on, we do need to count the number of stitches and adjust our stitch count so that we may work the extreme drop stitch pattern. Now for the sleeve, the stitch count does change slightly because in this case we're working in the round as opposed to working in rows as we did for our body panel. Now here we're looking for a stitch count that's in multiples of 11. I've counted my stitches. I have 40 stitches. In order to bring it up to a multiple of 11, I need to increase by 4 stitches. That way I bring it up to 44 stitches, which is a multiple of 11. When working these increases, you must work them evenly spaced out as opposed to working them one after the other. When you work an increase, you are working 2 stitches into 1 stitch. Round 2, chain 2 counts as a double crochet. I'll work an increase into this first stitch. So here I am working 2 double crochets into 1 stitch. That would be my first increase. And then I'll continue on working a few stitches before working my second increase. That way I make certain that I am spacing out my increases. So I've worked my way to the end. Here's my last stitch. I'll work an increase into that last stitch as well. That way I've worked 4 increases and I can now slip stitch into the second chain from chain 2 to join. Round 3, chain 2 counts as a double crochet and turn. Into the next stitch, double crochet. Now do remember that our stitch pattern does change slightly because here we're working in the round as opposed to working in rows. Work 4 more double crochets. So including the chain 2 and that first double crochet, you have worked 6 double crochets. Then chain 1, skip the next stitch and work 10 double crochets. So that's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Then chain 1, skip 1 stitch and work 10 double crochets. So that's your stitch pattern for this round. It's chain 1, skip 1, 10 double crochets. When you get to the end of the round, chain 1, skip 1 and work 4 double crochets into the last 4 stitches. To end the round, slip stitch into the second chain from chain 2 to join. Round 4, chain 2 counts as a double crochet and turn. Work double crochets into the next 2 stitches. Then chain 1, skip 1 stitch and 3 double crochets into the next stitch, chain 1 space and the following stitch. Then chain 1, skip 1 stitch and work double crochets into the next 6 stitches. Then chain 1, skip 1 stitch and work 3 double crochets. So that's your stitch pattern for this round. It's chain 1, skip 1, 6 double crochets, chain 1, skip 1, 3 double crochets. Continue to the end of the round. I'm at the end of the round. I've worked those 3 double crochets. To end, I'll chain 1, skip 1, and work 3 double crochets into those last 3 stitches. To end the round, slip stitch into the second chain from chain 2 to join. Round 5, chain 2 and turn. Into the next stitch, work a double crochet, then chain 1, skip the next stitch, and work 7 double crochets. So your stitch pattern for this round is chain 1, skip 1 stitch, 2 double crochets, chain 1, skip 1 stitch, 7 double crochets. I've worked my way to the end of the round. Here's my 7 double crochets, and at the same time you can see that my chain 1 spaces have taken shape. So to end the round, it's chain 1, skip the last stitch, and slip stitch into the second chain from chain 2 to join. Now we've set up those chain 1 spaces in order to work our extreme drop stitch pattern in the following round. This is where we will change our yarn color, so I will need to go back to undo that slip stitch, and while slip stitching, bring in my change of color. So here I am going through that second chain from chain 2, and then I'll bring in this loop with my change of color and pull through to complete that slip stitch. For the next round, it's chain 2. Chain 2 counts as a double crochet. So when working this round, I am not going to turn. This is the only time that I'm not turning after my chain 2. Into the same stitch from where chain 2 comes out of, work another double crochet. So we've worked an increase by working 2 stitches into 1. Into the next stitch, work 2 double crochets, then chain 3, work the extreme drop stitch into these 5 chain 1 spaces. Also, don't forget to cut off on your tail end from the previous yarn color. So I am speeding up on this video because the stitch pattern is just as we had worked for the body of this cardigan. Then chain 3, work 2 double crochets into the next stitch. That's 1 and 2, and 2 double crochets into the next stitch. So that's 1 and 2. And that's your stitch pattern for this round. It's chain 3, the extreme drop stitch, chain 3, 2 double crochets, 2 double crochets. Continue on to the end of this round. I've worked my way to the end of the round. I've worked a chain 3 after this extreme drop stitch, and now I'll slip stitch into the second chain from chain 2 to join. For the next round, chain 2 and turn. Here we're working double crochets into all stitches. We're working 3 double crochets into the chain 3 spaces and 1 double crochet into the stitch above the extreme drop stitch, just as we had done when working the body of this cardigan. Here are the sleeve lengths for the different sizes. Use the length for the size that you are working on. So I've completed that round of double crochets. Here it is. Now just to give you an idea of what the sleeve actually looks like, I've completed one sleeve, and I will compare it to the sleeve that I'm working on. Here's the completed sleeve. Now after I've worked that round of double crochets, I continued on working the lemon peel stitch pattern. And then I repeated the setup rounds for my extreme drop stitch pattern, just as I had worked it along the bottom edge of my sleeve. I worked the round of double crochets, but before doing so, I needed to adjust my stitch count so that I could work the extreme drop stitch pattern. Remember, it's always in multiples of 11 in order to work the stitch pattern. So to give you an idea of the measurements of the sleeve, let's go ahead and take some measurements. I've worked my sleeve to 17 inches, which is the sleeve length for a size medium. That's around 43 centimeters. Now here I want to measure from the bottom edge of the ribbing going up to the setup on my extreme drop stitch right at the top edge. So the measurement to my round of double crochets measures 14 inches, or it's 36 centimeters. So we now know that measuring from the bottom edge to the round of double crochets before our setup on the extreme drop stitch measured 14 inches. That means that those rounds from the top edge to where we've set up our extreme drop stitch measured 3 inches. So it's 14 inches plus 3 inches. So you would work your sleeve from the ribbing, working upwards until you have 3 inches left to work. Once you've got your 3 inches left to work, you can begin on your setup for the extreme drop stitch and your change of color. So that means you're going to repeat those rounds that we had worked when working our chain 1 spaces for the setup on the extreme drop stitch pattern. So on this sleeve, now that I've worked it to the correct length for my size, I'll fasten off and I'll keep behind a long enough tail to help with the seaming. Now there's one more thing to explain before I actually get down to working that sleeve. Notice that your sleeve needs to taper from the ribbing, getting wider and wider as we go up the sleeve. And in order to do so, we need to work increases. So I worked increases right at the start of my sleeve, right here, and then I worked an increase round in between, and my final increase round I worked right at the top when I worked my next setup on the extreme drop stitch. It was those rounds of double crochets. That way I got my sleeve to get wider and wider. Okay, so you'll know when to stop on your increase rounds is when the width of your sleeve measures the same as the armhole depth measurement for the size that you are working on. In my case, it was 7.5 inches. Notice here that the width of my sleeve is the same at that 7.5 inches, which is the armhole depth measurement for my size, which is a medium. So you will work increase rounds along the length of the sleeve until the width of the sleeve measures the armhole depth measurement for the size you are working on. Let's have a look at it here. When I bring my sleeve and match it against the armhole space right here, notice that the sleeve fits into that space, which is my armhole depth measurement. So again, you will work increases, as many increase rounds as need be, until your sleeve, the width of your sleeve measures the armhole depth measurement. Okay, so let's get back to the sleeve that I was working on, and here I finished that round of double crochets and I slip stitched to join. For the next round, chain 1 and turn. Here we will be working the lemon peel stitch pattern. Into that same stitch as chain 1, single crochet. So for this round, we are working an increase round. To work increases in this round, we will work 2 stitches into 1 stitch. Here I'm working a double crochet into this next stitch, and I'll also work a single crochet into the same stitch. That's my increase. It's a double crochet and a single crochet into 1 stitch. Continuing on with the stitch pattern, it's a double crochet into the next stitch. Always follow the stitch pattern, alternating your stitches. A single crochet into the next stitch, a double crochet into the next stitch, a single crochet into the next stitch, and so on until you get to your last stitch. I've worked my way to the last stitch. Now, if you remember, I started off with a single crochet. That means my last stitch must be a double crochet. Now, I've already worked a single crochet into my second last stitch. So into my last stitch, I'll work a double crochet. That way, I'm able to keep my stitch pattern. If you find that your second last stitch is a double crochet, into the last stitch you can work a single crochet and a double crochet. So you will work 2 stitches into the last stitch only if you need to sort of keep with the stitch pattern, or rather keep with the sequence of the stitch pattern. Once you've got your stitch pattern correct, you can slip stitch to join. For the next round, remember that we had started the previous round with a single crochet. So this round we will start with a chain 2, which counts as a double crochet. We always alternating our stitches within the round, and we're alternating stitches for every round as well. So it's always double crochets into single crochets and single crochets into double crochets, just as we had done with our stitches when we worked the body of this cardigan. So you can continue on working the lemon peel stitch pattern up until you get to just before the elbow. And then at that point, you can work another increase round. So your increase rounds are optional. You can work as many increase rounds as need be, depending on the fit of your sleeve. If you're going for a much looser fit on your sleeve, you work more increase rounds. Here I've just chosen to work 3 increase rounds. That's towards the start of the sleeve, towards the middle of the sleeve, and before my next setup on that extreme drop stitch right at the top of the sleeve. So for this increase round, I've chained 2, which counts as a double crochet. Now, when working an increase round and your previous round was the lemon peel stitch pattern. It's quite different from our previous increase round, because in that round we had been working increases into a round where we had just worked double crochets. Now here, when working this increase round, we need to work 3 stitches into 1 stitch. So here I've worked a single crochet, double crochet, single crochet, all into 1 stitch. By doing so, I get to keep the sequence of my stitch pattern. In the next stitch, I'll work a double crochet, followed by a single crochet in the next stitch, and so on. So even though I've worked an increase, my stitch pattern where I'm alternating those stitches has remained unchanged. And at the same time, I'm still working single crochets into double crochets and double crochets into single crochets. Had I only worked 2 stitches for my increase in this round, I would be unable to keep that pattern sequence. So I've continued on with my sleeve. I've worked this lemon peel stitch pattern, and at this point my sleeve measures 14 inches. So I've got to work 3 more inches before I reach the required length of my sleeve for the size that I'm working on. So you will stop 3 inches before you reach the required length on your sleeve. Those 3 inches will be used for the double crochet, chain 1, skip 1 rounds, for the setup on the extreme drop stitch, and then it will be your change of color. You must remember that before you work the double crochet, chain 1, skip 1 rounds for the setup on the extreme drop stitch, you do need to adjust your stitch pattern. So you'll count the number of stitches and adjust it to a multiple of 11. Here you can work a round of single crochet, so you will work your increases into this round to adjust your stitch pattern to a multiple of 11, and then you can work your rounds of double crochet, chain 1, skip 1 rounds, and then it's your change of color and the extreme drop stitch stitch pattern, and then you'll work a round of double crochet, and you'll finish off with 1 round of the lemon peel stitch pattern. Fasten off and cut off on your excess yarn. So your stitch pattern is exactly the same as you had worked along the bottom of the sleeve. So it's those 3 rounds of double crochet and the extreme drop stitch pattern, then it's a round of double crochet and 1 round of lemon peel stitch pattern to complete the sleeve. You will change your color just before you work the extreme drop stitch pattern. Okay, then you can fasten off and cut off on the excess yarn, leaving behind a long enough tail to help with the seaming. So bringing back the body of this cardigan, at this point we do need to seam along the shoulders of this cardigan. I've seamed along the shoulders on either side of the cardigan, as you see here. When seaming, you do need to have your panels laid right sides facing in and wrong sides facing out. And for your sleeve, when fitting on your sleeve, you need to fit in the sleeve with your right side facing out. Here I'm tucking the sleeve into the body of this cardigan. I'll align the armhole space to my top edge of the sleeve. Here you see it. and I'll bring that tail end of my sleeve and align it with the underarm, with the exact underarm of the armhole space. Once you have the sleeve aligned with the armhole space, you can go ahead and seam the sleeve to that armhole space. I've gone ahead and seamed both the sleeves to the armhole spaces. I now need to work the ribbings along the front opening of this cardigan and along the bottom edge of this cardigan. We'll begin with the ribbings along the bottom edge of this cardigan. Now I've chosen to work a different ribbing as compared to the one that I worked on the sleeve along the bottom edge of this cardigan and along the front opening of this cardigan. I will be working a ribbing using front post double crochets alternated with back post double crochets. Let's begin with the ribbing along the bottom edge. Attach yarn to the first stitch along the bottom edge. Chain 2. Chain 2 counts as a double crochet. We'll now work a front post double crochet. Yarn over, insert your hook into the post of the stitch. Going from the front for a front post double crochet, pull up a loop. You've got 3 loops on your hook, yarn over, go through 2 loops on your hook, yarn over, go through 2 loops on your hook. Now into the next 2 stitches, we'll work back post double crochets. To work a back post double crochet, yarn over, go into the post of the stitch going from behind as I am doing here, pull up a loop. You have 3 loops on your hook, yarn over, go through 2 loops, yarn over, go through 2 loops. So for this ribbing, we're working 2 back post double crochets and we'll alternate with 2 front post double crochets. Here I've worked 2 back post double crochets and continuing on, I'll work 2 front post double crochets. That's the stitch pattern for the rest of the ribbing. Continue on to the end of this row. I've continued on with this ribbing. I've completed my stitches right to the end of this row, alternating back post, 2 back post double crochets with 2 front post double crochets. Now we'll work the ribbing along the front opening of this cardigan. So when working the ribbing along the front edge, we need to work these front post double crochets and back post double crochets into double crochets. And you'll notice that there are no stitches to work into. So we first need to work 1 row of double crochets before working the ribbing row. So here I've attached yarn and then I've worked a chain 2 and I'll work double crochets all around this front opening. I'll work these double crochets into the little gaps along this edge of the front opening, and I'll make certain that my stitches are kept evenly spaced as I'm working them. Continue on with double crochets all along the front opening. I've completed those double crochets along the front opening. I've also worked 1 row of my ribbing, which is a chain 2, turn, a front post double crochet, then I'll alternate with 2 back post double crochets and 2 front post double crochets until I've completed this ribbing row. You can then fasten off, cut off the excess yarn. The only thing left to do is to weave in all your ends and then you've completed your cardigan. So that does it for this tutorial. Thank you for watching and I hope you enjoyed it.